This is part 2 of my overview of Trump's meeting with the UK Prime Minister because I couldn't fit it all in one 10-minute video. If you haven't seen it, part 1 is the video immediately preceding this one on my profile. He says he doesn't want to say anything bad about Jerome Powell because we're doing well without the rate cuts, but that it is affecting our housing. And then he says that we should be 3 points lower, and each one of those points would save us $360 billion in savings. I don't know how. And then he says that Jerome Powell is going to be gone soon anyway, so it doesn't really matter. He uses the word opulent at least 3 times when describing his own golf course. I will remind you, opulent means ostentatiously rich and luxurious or lavish, and then ostentatious means in a pretentious or showy way designed to impress. So he's just saying his whole thing is gaudy. He says he doesn't like the mayor of London because they're a nasty person who's doing a terrible job, and then the prime minister steps in and is like, yeah, he's actually a friend of mine. He says if you want the Israeli hostages back, you need to be very energetic, and then he clarifies that by energetic he means ruthless and violent. He clarifies that for us. He says Putin went through the Russia hoax with him and that he didn't think that he would ever be this difficult to deal with. And then he said Putin is going through a lot economically and they could be so rich and thriving like practically any other country in the world, and that they have serious rare earth. This man doesn't even know what rare earth materials are. He says he's no longer interested in talking with Putin because they have great conversations and then missiles go flying hours later. He is being bullied and manipulated by world leaders in front of cameras for everyone to see. He says politics is quite simple and that the ones who win are the ones who cut taxes the most and give the lowest energy prices and get us out of wars. And you can go back 1,000 years or even 1,000,000 years and see that this holds. I just want to say 1,000,000 years ago, modern Homo sapiens hadn't even evolved. Where we were in our evolutionary timeline is we were Homo heidelbergensis, okay? And the earliest known actual civilization where something like elections could take place was Mesopotamia, which started about 4,000 BC, so 6,000 years ago, not 1,000,000 years. He says again that 0 people came illegally into our country last month, and then says that his election was the most consequential of the past 129 years. I don't know why he picked 129 years, but that is what he said. He says in the EU, there were countries with literally 0 crime, and now that a bunch of immigrants have come in, there is tremendous crime. And then he says, you know what countries I'm talking about, but he does not tell us which countries he's talking about. He talks about how they're meeting with China right now to make a trade deal and that we have a really great relationship with China, even though he said in the past couple months many times that we already have a trade deal with China. And then he makes some weird claim that he does things that sometimes he shouldn't do that aren't the best for the American people, but they're really beneficial to these other countries. So he does them anyways in order to be, I don't know, a good trading partner, I guess. But he doesn't give any examples of this or anything like that, just says it. He says again that there's over 200 countries and that you obviously can't meet with all of them. So he's just going to set a blanket tariff for all of those countries at 15 to 20% on all products coming out of their country. And of course says that they're going to pay that even though you're the one who pays tariffs. And then he brags about Japan being open when it was previously completely closed off to American products. And then keeps bragging about all the deals he's made with like Indonesia and stuff when he's unable to make deals with our major trading partners like China and India and Brazil and those ones. His war with wind power is not over yet. He says wind is awful. It's the most expensive type of energy. It destroys fields and plains and waterways. And then he says, look out there, there's no windmills, but if you look in the other direction, you'll see windmills. He's talking about wind turbines, by the way. He holds his hands out like this and says that you can take 1,000 times more energy out of a hole that big. It's called oil and gas, and no one would ever even see the hole. And that's why oil and gas is better than wind energy. He says all windmills are made in China, and then he says that it used to be Germany and China, but now it's practically just all China. And then he says again that you can't bury them and asks the question, so what are you going to do, just dump them in the ocean? And he says he restricted windmills in the US because they kill, quote, all your birds. All of them. Let's talk about Jeffrey Epstein. He says of course he's allowed to give Ghislaine Maxwell a pardon, but that would be inappropriate to talk about right now. He says he hasn't even been interested in the Epstein files because it's just a hoax that's being run by the worst scum on earth. His words, the worst scum on earth. And then he lists off people, including listing off one of the people who ran the Epstein files as the Autopen. He talks about how the people who have the Epstein files could easily put phony things in it, even though he's the one who currently has those files. And then he talks about how the Steele dossier was just completely made up and that was a hoax as well. He says that the files are run by his enemies, whatever that means, and then says that obviously if he was in the files, it would have been used during the election to discredit him. Regarding the Wall Street Journal article, he says that he doesn't do drawings, and he especially doesn't do drawings of women. And then he says that he's always been a top guy, and Jeffrey Epstein's always been a controversial guy, and that other people also sent letters, so apparently his was false because other people were also sending letters, like Bill Clinton, who he liked to call out. He says his poll numbers are up 4.5 points since the ridiculous Epstein stuff came up, and then a reporter asked him about Epstein getting thrown out of Mar-a-Lago, and he says that's old history and it's very easy to explain, but he's not going to waste his time explaining it. And then he says that he did something inappropriate, he hired help, and Trump threw him out, persona non grata. He says he never went to the island, but that Bill Clinton apparently went there 28 times and that Larry Summers also went there. And then he says, I swear to God, he says this, he never had the privilege of going to the island. Never had the privilege. He says no one even knows who Kamala is and that she was a horrible vice president and no one even knows what her last name is, and then clarifies that it's Harris, and then says that she never called a border patrol agent even though she was the border czar. I will just remind you her goal was to go down to South America and secure private investments that would prevent people from wanting to leave those areas, and she got like $4.5 billion of private investment, so I would say pretty successful at the job she was tasked with doing. He says the trade deal with the EU was not just the biggest trade deal in history, but just the biggest deal in history. Whatever that means. I mean, I guess ending the world wars, that wasn't a bigger deal than his trade deals with Europe, but whatever. And finally, he says that a bunch of farmers just kept killing themselves because they were cash poor, and then when their mothers or fathers died and handed down the farm to them, they had to pay a death tax of 50%, and then the banks came in and just took the land from them when they couldn't afford that. And then he says that he offered for these farmers to stay in his penthouse in New York, and they denied it because all they want to do is farm. They just love farming. So you can probably see why I had to do a part 2 here, because this one also ran over 6 minutes. I guess I was right about halfway through my notes. Insane. I mean, totally insane, right? And I didn't know if a part 2 was going to be necessary, but apparently it was. Thank you for being here. To the last video, it was also 10% of you who finished these videos. I do appreciate it. And if you're somehow one of the 10% who made it this far and is not following me, come on, just click that button, dude.